anomalies on Head Over Heels are very hard to spot, but I've had a jolly good go. I use the More ABBA Gold as usual. I'm also lucky enough to have a Visitor's Polydor CD from the early 80s. Not one of the red label ones, unfortunately, but one of the regular ones. I'm unlucky enough to have an Astley one. The Tretov More ABBA Gold version sounds okay. It's a little bit bright. The Visitors one is brilliant. It's really nice. The Astley one, very harsh, loud, shouty, what you'd expect from Astley, especially the 97 mixes. Stereo appears to be identical on all of them. There is some actually very good stereo work where the keyboards swap channels and that sort of thing. I said when I did the Visitors Anomalies that they were never really given credit for what they did with synthesizers, but this again, it's like the Visitors, it's just full of little extra nuances, and I'm going to point some of these out as we go along. Just suffice to say that there is some beautiful xylophone work. It's either a synthesized xylophone or a proper one, but there's some beautiful xylophone work, low level in the mix, really, really nice. So even if you can't spot some of these anomalies, just have a little listen and just try and spot little things that you've never heard before in the mix, because it's really, really good. At 2 seconds, not an anomaly, what I was talking about earlier on, some brilliant low level detail. There's some percussion, it's right slap bang in the centre, just a tiny, tiny little bit of percussion, but it's lovely, brilliant. At 6 seconds, there's an increase in hiss. People said that digital was noiseless, but it actually isn't. You do get a bit of low level hiss, and I think that this is where they've obviously overdubbed a tape or something like that, and the noise is built up. Out of phase at 19 seconds, there is a spitting sausage click. At 20 seconds, there's a small click audible in phase on the left hand side. At 22 seconds, the guitar, which you're almost expecting it to finish its last note, but it actually doesn't. It's where the guitar's doing a sort of doing long held notes like da 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 da, and that last note you're expecting to hear, but it's actually not there. I think your ear just, or your brain, makes up for it, but it's not there. Peculiar one. Now, 27 seconds, 28 seconds, and 29 seconds. There's a little bit of skullduggery going on. This is the bit where you have the introduction of the vocal, I have a. Now, at 28 seconds, I thought I heard, when listening to Tretov, I thought I heard a hissy sound during the words, I have. And then I wondered whether or not it was intentional, because it almost sounded like some percussion. Listening to the Visitors on the Polydor mix, even though it's a lower level, because it's a lower level, you can actually bear to listen to it a bit more. You can hear that at 27 seconds, there's actually a little glitch, which has, they've tried to cover up, and they've covered it up by putting a little bit of extra percussion on. It is audible in the Astley one as well, if you can bear to listen to it. At 29 seconds then, out of phase, there's a dull EQ bit, because this is where the edit point is. It's in that snare drum. Just as you sing I have a very good friend, there's a snare drum that's sort of quite loud on its own. The EQ dips out there, gets a bit duller, and then it brightens up again more or less straight afterwards. 38 seconds, out of phase, there is a glitch or a dropout on the word personal. In phase, there's a little bit of overemphasis on the put syllable and a click at the same time. Now, the chorus is very heavily compressed. You can hear that if you listen to it out of phase, especially. All right, but there are certain points, 57 seconds, 1 minute 13 seconds, 2 minutes, and similar points in the other choruses, where the compression is quite noticeable because the bit before it, the with no trace of hesitation, she keeps going, that is supposed to build up in volume. All right, so that when you get to head over heels, that should be the loudest point. But on the word heels, the volume comes down again quite abruptly because it is an edit again, but the limiting is stopping it from going too loud. And that, I think, is something that wasn't quite right when they were recording on, you know, those early digital recordings. You just couldn't get a decent sort of amount of dynamic range. At least, I mean, people say that analog was limited for dynamic range, and yes, it was, but you could go over into the red without too many severe consequences on tape. But you can't at all in digital, and I think in those days, perhaps they were being especially cautious or whatever, but somehow or other, you've not got a full dynamic range, and it's very obvious at that point. Rudolf will go mad at hearing me say that. Sorry, Rudolf. You can hear a drum machine in the background, and that is also trying to cover up edits as well. And that's on just about all the choruses. At 1 minute 11 seconds, there's a very harsh snare that's not being caught by the compressor properly. And that's similar at the same points in the other choruses. Now, out of phase at 1 minute 29 seconds, you can hear an abrupt synthesizer. It's covering an edit again, comes in quite abruptly out of phase. In phase, it's not quite so abrupt. It's on the right-hand side. But another little detail that I mean, I hadn't heard this. It's just tiny, but I hadn't heard it properly until I went anomaly hunting. Okay, some crackly noises now. We've got some out of phase at 131. You've got some more, beg your pardon, that are in phase at 132 and at 141. Okay, 227, 228 out of phase. The drums are very reverberant. Reverb covereth a multitude of sins. And here it's covering an edit to the instrumental. During the instrumental, do listen out for some drum machine cymbals. They're very good. And they're especially good out of phase. Now, if you hear no other anomalies in this song, do listen out for this one at 231. All right, Agneta has just sung If You Know What I Mean. She's holding this on for a long time, and at 231 you can hear she's either, it could be a couple of things, she's either gulped, she's either her throat has cracked, or there's a little remnant of an earlier take still left on the tape. But it goes like that, or something a little bit like that anyway, in Agneta's voice. Okay, if you can imagine what it would be like if she's gulped or she's had a drink of water after that, then that's what it sounds like. 246, quite deep down in the mix, and it's covered up by percussion, but there's a slight knocking or rapping noise centre stage. At 3 minutes out of phase, that edit hasn't worked quite so well at the beginning of the chorus. 3:11 to 17 is best heard out of phase, although you can hear the end of it in phase as well. What you've got are the drum machine sounds really, really strange. It's a very obvious drum overdub edit. Now, it ends with a bass drum going boom, like that, and you can hear that at 3:17, and you can hear that both in phase and out of phase if you listen on the left hand side. Lastly but not leastly, at 3:42, in phase, there's some crackle at the end.